Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about Shabbos elevators. Let me just let's start like this. Recently, in Bnei Brak, on the outskirts of Bnei Brak, there was a development that began building buildings that were between 10 and 12 stories high. Now, everyone's been in Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak, it's a low-rise city. There's very, very few buildings that are over 5-6 stories. The reason for that being that it's a highly Shabbos observant community, and it's hard to live on the 6th floor if you plan on keeping Shabbos properly. Now, recently there was this new development in the outskirts of Bnei Brak that started building buildings that were much taller. Now, what were they thinking? So they had spoken to an institute that's responsible for giving hechsherim on Shabbos elevators, and they had come to an agreement that with certain additional, tikkunim and enhancements of the Shabbos elevator protocol, that they were going to present a Shabbos elevator that would be suitable for all Jews to use on Shabbos, and therefore they were being seimich that, and more than seimich, they had gotten a hechsher or a promise of a hechsher from Greiser Rabbanim, and they were pretty sure they were going to have an elevator that would be suitable for all, and therefore they'd be able to sell apartments that were on the 10th and 11th and 12th floors without a problem because people would be able to use the elevator. Now, when others got wind of this, they started making some sort of pushback that Shabbos elevators are problematic, you can't have Shabbos elevators, to the point where the Rabbanim who had given the heter, who had given the hechsher, were going to give the hechsher on these elevators, went to have a sit-down with the Gedolei Hadar, and they published a letter with their retraction on their heter after that, and the nusach of the letter caught my attention, and that's really the angle that I want to explore over here. Maybe a little less pistons, and more this. The nusach of the letter is, the Paiskim who were going to be the matirim on this, were the mechabrim of the Sefer Archa Shabbos, the 4-volume Sefer Archa Shabbos. They wrote that when they were young. They started writing them when they were in their 30s, I think. Today they're in their 60s, give or take. It's Reb Shalom Yosef Gelber and Reb Yitzchak Mordechai Rubin, two Greiser Rabbanim, together with Reb Cyril Rosenberg, another big Rav from Bnei Brak, and they were going to be the Rabbanim HaMatirim, Rabbanim HaMaskimim on this new elevator with the new protocol. Now, they write over here, and this is the line that caught my attention. The beginning of that letter starts off like this. Hanhagas HaKlal, leading of Klal Yisrael, Mesura L'Gedolei V'Ziknei Hadar. It's given over to the Gedolim and the Zikanim of the Dar. Meaning, right there, they almost suspend their ability to paskin. Meaning, we're young, yes, we're paiskim, yes, we went through the sugya, yes, we came to a conclusion where we think would be halachically permitted, but Hanhagas HaKlal is Mesura L'Gedolei V'Ziknei Hadar. It says, V'hinei be'inyan mashe iskaknu livdek sug chadash al maliyos Shabbos. This job, this task that we were given, to be baidik, the kasher status of a new elevator for Shabbos, shehaya nira la'aniyas daitenu, that we thought she mitchainenes ba'ofen she'en b'ch shashchol Shabbos chas v'shalom. We were reasonably certain, we came to the conclusion that this elevator does not come into question with any chil Shabbos questions, but kasher banu kamei maranan v'rabanan, when we came in front of the Gedolei Maran Rosh Yeshiva, Hagayin Reb Gershon Edelstein Shlita Zatzal, Umaron Hagayin Hagadol Reb Dov Landa Shlita, Shamanu as Chavas Daitam B'chol Inyan Hashimush. We heard their opinion, their position in regards to using elevators on Shabbos B'chlal, and therefore they told us that they feel it's inappropriate for Shabbos, coupled with the fact that elevators is an evolving science that could keep bringing up new questions. Together with that, we say we retract our hechsher, and therefore Ein le'ishtamish b'maliot elu klal b'Shabbos Kodesh b'Yom Tov. And then they end off signing, and this is another potent line: V'ashrei hadar asher aktanim nishmaim legedolim. Lucky is the generation that the young, the smaller ones, heed the older ones, heed the great ones. So the letter is a very interesting window into how psak sometimes develops. Meaning psak is not always about the halachas that it says. Psak is a much broader need and a much broader composition of things that go into it to come to psak. So it's that part of this letter that piqued my interest, and I want to explore the concept that they're expressing over here of zilus of the Shabbat, and the general idea of being shomer, the nature of Shabbos, how it's been adhered to for thousands of years, and this type of overall conservatism when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, like being extra cautious and extra conservative to not have any new kulas. Now, let's just give some of the background information that's relevant to the shilas of an elevator. The earlier machleksim, who was matir, who was machmer, and then we'll try to circle back to today's Zilus of the Shabbat aspect of it. So now the first part is what we need to discuss is why is an elevator is an electrical thing, right? You push the button, it closes this, it completes the circuit, and based on that, in those days it was a little more mechanical. Today it's a little more computerized. An elevator car will appear at the floor that you want. You'll push another button, and it will take you to the floor that you want to go to. That's, Pachas Yosef without getting too scientific. Now, why is completing an electrical circuit, why is pushing that button Asar on Shabbos in the first place? There is obviously none of the 39 malachas that speak specifically to pushing an electrical button on Shabbos. Now, so when electricity began to become popular in the early 1900s, some of the earliest poskim, some of the poskim from that time talk about it. Amongst them, the Beis Yitzchak and Rav Chaim Moser and other poskim, in the meantime, and many different ideas about why electricity should be Asar on Shabbos, came up, and some of them a little more far-fetched, some of them with not the greatest havana of how electricity works, but let's just be misakim some of them. So originally, some poskim felt that electricity is Asar because it's like making a fire. There's electrical current, fire, essentially because if electrical current is exposed to something else, it could cause a fire. So electrical current is like a latent fire that's running through the wires, and by creating that fire, that's mavir, it's like making a fire on Shabbos. Now, it came along many other poskim, and they said that that's a misunderstanding of how electricity works. Electricity is not a fire, it's a current, it's natural forces, etc. It's not a fire. So now, two of the most prominent positions in why electricity is Asar are the Chazon Ish and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and based on them, a lot comes down from their meaning on how chamor and how much you have to look at it. So there's a beautiful correspondence, again on the vein of Ashrei, Ashrei Hadar She'ar Ktanim Nishma'im L'Gedolim. There's a beautiful conversation, a chilufim mechtavim, letters back and forth between Rav Shlomo Zalman and the Chazon Ish. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman is kind of the hero of the story. He's the hero of understanding electricity and being makel when able, and he's really the hero of the 20th century, the one who really understood electricity and brought it like into the halachic terms, how it is today. Now, as a young man, in his early 20s, Rav Shlomo Zalman put out a sefer called Ma'irei Eish, which was about the definition of electricity in halacha, to explain what electricity is in halacha. What the Welt says, and this is actually expressed in some of the letters that I'll read to you from, is that Rav Shlomo Zalman's mother was deaf, and at that time they invented some sort of primitive hearing aid that would go in the ear or around the ear, and it had a battery in it, but it wasn't the type that was able to weed out like ambient noise and background noise, so it was extremely uncomfortable for the deaf person to use this hearing aid. So what it was there was a button you would push to engage the hearing aid. You'd listen to the person talking to you, you push the button and you turn it off, because to leave it on the whole time would A, drain the battery, B, gave the deaf person a tremendous headache. And Rav Shlomo Zalman was curious if it would be possible to use that on Shabbos, to be makel for his mother. And based on that desire, he was, went into the sugya all the way in. And in his early 20s, he published a sefer called Ma'irei Eish, where he characterizes, what electricity is, lahalacha, and what the parameters, when you could use it, etc. Now, the haskamas to this Ma'irei Eish, if you'll ever take a look, he has haskamas from, let's say, the first one's actually from Rav Kook, who was someone he was close with. The next one's from Beis Zalman, who was his Rosh Hashiva in Eitz Chaim. Then the third one he sent away to Rav Chaim Moser in Vilna to get haskama. And each one of them, it's almost like they're surprised. They're pashut shocked that a man his age could understand a topic this sophisticated, with such a tifa avanas on the scientific side and the learning side. It's like they're full of hispilus from Shlomo Zalman at 20, that he's able, early 20s, that he's able to do this. Rav Chaim Moser actually writes that he's aware of some shaylas. He's not holding by publicizing them and going into them in a public manner. They're an obscure shayla, they're not so important to discuss. But once you're writing on it, you did an amazing job. Now, obviously, Rav Chaim Moser was from a generation before where electricity was an obscure, semi-irrelevant shayla, and Rav Shlomo Zalman was the next generation where electricity would dominate every shayla, where it became, one of the most important components of every shayla. So, Rav Shlomo Zalman, in his Ma'irei Eish, tries to characterize how electricity works, and he's responding to a Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish in Ar Chaim, Simin Nun, the Chazon Ish is mechadish something. The Chazon Ish says that electricity on Shabbos l'daita is either boine or makeh b'patish. He says because the way an electric current works is that there's the positive and the negative. Everything's available, and when you flip the switch, it connects the current. It allows the current to flow freely and create a full electrical circuit. And by creating that current, by bringing, he says, yesh me'ayin, you're bringing dead wires to life. You're completing the circuit and allowing the wires to function, do what they're supposed to. That's baina or makav patish. He's a little bit unsure, but ledaita, he says karev hadavar, that you're being over and issa deiraisa every time that you turn on an electrical switch. That's what the Chazon Ish says. Now, the Rishon Zalman Auerbach and many others found this to be a stretch, a little bit of a chiddush to them. And Rishon Zalman writes to the Chazon Ish letters to question it. Some of these letters were published in his Chuvas, some were published later in other Svarim, but he writes to the Chazon Ish. For example, this is where you see his mother's hearing aid. He says, "B'sifra le'il chashavas seminun," you wrote what you wrote. He says. Then he says, "Psak zeh shel Rabbeinu," this psak of you, the Chazon Ish, garam li tsar, caused me a lot of pain. He says, "Kizel lemala me'eser shanim," 10 years ago already, I had a masa matan with this, with a chashav rav in Yerushalayim, because he says, "Vasisi ma'isa lahater," and based on my conversation, I was matir li'imi mayrasi tichya shel tzarenu agadol kavda yaznei mishmaya. My mother is hard of hearing; she can't hear anymore. And based on my understanding of electricity and how it's not the deraisa that you describe it to be, and in conversation with other Gedolei Rabbanim in Yerushalayim, I was mekel, and seeing that you're publishing and you say for that it's over and issa deraisa has caused me great pain," he says. Then he explains a little bit how the hearing aid works. He explains why he's not chayshish for makav patish and baina and electricity. He gives a few examples of similar things that he holds would be a raya. And then, and this is like a beautiful part, he apologizes to the Chazon Ish for giving examples and for explaining. He says, obviously, you know everything that I know and then some, and it's not my job to educate you or to give you zushtels and whatever. I'm just asking for a little clarification. If you could please take from your time to clarify the parameters of your position, that's all I'm asking. To which the Chazon Ish sends him back a letter. Rishon Zalman, responds again, full of apologies and full of humble deference to the Chazon Ish. But again, standing his position that he wouldn't agree with the Chazon Ish, and back and forth. And it's two letters, and they're a little bit involved and technical to go through all the details, but the tone of them is a beautiful thing to see. Like Rishon Zalman at the same time is not backing down, strongly holds what he holds, and at the same time is completely overwhelmed with humility when discussing his opinions of the Chazon Ish. Now, Mechalefin, what Rishon Zalman seems to hold, which is what the Beis Yitzchak held, is that electricity is only a derabanan. That creating an electric circuit and turning on a light or doing creating any electric circuit is only a derabanan, either because of moilid or noilad, or the Beis Yitzchak has other terms, and there's many different paiskisha terms that they use to create it, but Rishon Zalman's worldview that electricity is only the derabanan and it's not the deraisa of baina did become the dominant position amongst the paiskim, that electricity is not a deraisa generally, unless electricity actually, like an induction heater or something like that, where it actually creates like an incandescent bulb or an induction heater that actually creates a physical, heated element, a metal that's heated to the point of being red hot. That is a vada deraisa of ma'avir. But anything short of that, according to Rishon Zalman and most contemporary paiskim, is only a derabanan. So now that's step one to understand what could be wrong with electric circuits and how to look at them. Do we look at it like a deraisa, derabanan? And according to most paiskim, outside of the Chazon Ish and a few others, Rav Moshe actually has several tshuvas about electricity, and he's a little bit. Well, in one of them, he actually says that I don't really understand how electricity works, and I don't know what it should be aser because of. In another one, he brings 5 possible suggestions what it could be aser for. In others, he suggests it could be baina, and others he doesn't. So it's very hard to get a clear feel what Rav Moshe held, the actual, really drill down and know what Rav Moshe held about electricity. If it's the rest of the Rabbanan, it's hard to actually put your finger on it. But he does express the Chazon Ish's tzad that it could be baina. So just in full transparency, Rav Moshe also brings that tzad to the fore in some of his chuvas. Now,
a lot of electric could be like, let's say, a heater, could be a fire. There's a lot of
those could all be fires.
Those
could be their isis, exactly. Those are mostly their isis. But any turning on these bulbs where there's no fire, or many other things where it's not l'chayra wouldn't be a deraisa. The nafkamina would be for amir la'akum. Nafkamina is psikracious with grummas. There's a lot of nafkaminas that come from it. Okay, so let's put that on the side. So now we have a little bit of background about what the parameters, the halachic parameters of the Yisr of electricity are. So now, the second nekuda that's very relevant to being matir a Shabbos elevator is the idea of automation on Shabbos. It's okay, even if something is aser, even if something is maybe even a deraisa aser, but how do we look at automation in halacha? How do we treat automation? So now there is a machlekes in the Mishnah. The Mishnah on Shabbos, on Daf Yud Zayin and Beis, actually brings a machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, about a litany of examples. The Mishnah goes through many, many examples of starting a malacha on Erev Shabbos in a way that it will continue on its own over Shabbos, like starting something being dyed, or starting something being ground, or starting something being pressed. All of those are actual malachas deiraisis. To press something on Shabbos is a deiraisa. To grind something is a malacha deiraisa. These are regular lamites avos malachas. And the Mishnah says examples where the Mishnah says that one is permitted to start it on Erev Shabbos, even though it will continue on its own on Shabbos itself, which is called in halachic terms shvisas kelim. That a person is mechuyev to be shavis on Shabbos. A person is not allowed to do malacha. You have to rest on Shabbos, but you're not mechuyev to ensure that all your kelim are resting on Shabbos as well. Meaning your stuff that you own or processes that are happening, you're not mechuyev to stop those. According to Beis Hillel, according to Beis Shammai, a person is mechuyev in shvisas kelim as well, and he's mechuyev to stop his kelim from doing malacha on Shabbos also. That's the basic machlekes of shvisas kelim. Now the Gemara introduces another element that we're all familiar with, and that's as follows. The Gemara brings a brisa that says that starting a water mill to grind on Shabbos, getting that started is not allowed. That's the Gemara brings from a brisa. Then the Gemara brings a machlekes. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbah had to learn that. Rabbah says, why are you not allowed to do that? He says, avsha milsa. It's a term everyone's familiar with. It's loud, it's noisy. And Rabbah doesn't explain why loud and noisy is problematic. He just says it's loud and noisy, and therefore it's problematic. Avsha milsa. It's loud, it's noisy, it's problematic. Rabbi Yosef says, he responds to Rabbah, he says, why do you have to say avsha milsa? Why don't you just say shvisas kelim aser? Just say shvisas kelim aser. To which the Gemara says, therefore, Amar Rabbi Yosef, this brisa holds shvisas kelim is aser. Now, that is coming from that. So let's just follow this through. So now, according to Rabbah, even in Beis Hillel Shita, that shvisas kelim is mutter, even in Beis Hillel that holds that automation is fine, and that you could have a keli doing something on Shabbos, but you see a caveat. If it's avsha milsa, if it's noisy or public, or somehow doesn't stem with the environment, the attitude of Shabbos, it could be aser anyhow, even though shvisas kelim is not permitted. But if you do Rav Yosef's version, that this brisa only holds shvisas kelim aser, so then we already know where we stand on that. We hold like Beis Hillel, that shvisas kelim is mutter. So if you hold like Rav Yosef, then there's nothing to take out of this Gemara, according to a lot of Rishonim. There's nothing that's negeya halacha l'maisa for us, who holds like Beis Shammai, to take out of that Gemara. But if you hold like Rabbah, that's a caveat in Beis Hillel's Shita, so then we just learned a very new important rule, that even though shvisas kelim is mutter on Shabbos, when it's avsha milsa, it's problematic. And based on that, and is machlekes Rishonim had a paskin, but the Mechaber actually paskins, that we hold like Beis Hillel, shvisas kelim is mutter always, even when it's avsha milsa. Comes along the Ramah. The Ramah says v'yesh imrim that if it's avsha milsa, ikaz yilusa the shabbata, and then it's aser. If it's loud and it's noticeable that a malacha is continuing, even though it's Shabbos, then it's already something that's not okay, and that's aser. And based on that, will be all the Shabbos with dishwashers and dryers and many household things that are going on in your house that you could start before Shabbos, if they're permitted to continue or not, would be totally on this. And the Paiskim will talk about it. The Ramah says it as a chumrah, though. The Ramah says it, l'chatchila, a person should be machmer, that when it's avsha milsa, even shvisas kelim you don't do. Now, that's the second component that's very important to understanding the elevator shadow. So now let's talk a little bit about the actual elevators. So elevators is like a 100-year-old invention, let's say, and eventually when Jews moved into urban areas that had elevators, it became a negay, the kishayla for them. And the question was to use them on Shabbos. So now the earliest solution was just to have a guy. If there's a doorman, so you ask the guy. That's what Paiskim talk about originally. Then they became available. Some sort of moderation that you could do to an elevator to make it stop on every floor. The original Shabbos elevator was nothing more than just programming the elevator to stop at every floor for a designated amount of time, so you don't have to push buttons. You get in, you wait, the elevator will eventually come and will eventually take you to your floor. That's the original Shabbos elevator, which is automated, so it's not a problem of shvisas kelim, let's say. It's automated, the elevator, but potentially it's avsha milsa, because an elevator makes loud noises, it beeps, it grinds, it's doing something on Shabbos that's noticeable, and that anyone who will see that you're being over on Shabbos. So it could potentially be negated to this. Now the problem is that there's many subterranean parts of the elevator that cause much more shilas. Today, as elevators got more and more sophisticated, and more safety measures were introduced into elevators, there's a tremendous amount of electronic eyes and sensors and weight measurers and all sorts of sophisticated technology that very clearly is monitoring the amount of people, the amount of weight, the timing, and etc., so that when a person comes into an elevator, he's triggering many things at the same time. He's doing 10 electric circuits are closing when he comes in. a weight monitor, a speed monitor, a safety monitor, a door guard. There's like endless things that could be that kept cropping up that made the shaila much, much more complicated. Now, so to address this, there was two mechons. They actually started together as one in Eretz Yisrael, like in the 50s. One is a rabbi professor, Rabbi Yisrael Rosen, Rabbi Dr. Yisrael Rosen, who's the head of today what's called, he's not alive, neither of them are alive, I think he's not alive, I think none of them are alive anymore. Was the head of what's called the Tzomet Institute, which is an institute for technology. That ended up becoming more of a little bit more left-leaning organization. Well, but a little more left-leaning. And then there was something else called the Mechon Lemada V'Technologia B'Halacha, which ended up being a much more Haredi institution, like a black hat institution. And the person that develops for today's conversation, we're going to discuss the not Tzomet. We're going to discuss the Mechon's elevator. Is Reb Levi Yitzchak Halpern, Lubavitcher Chassid, who was born in Yerushalayim, Yelid Yerushalayim, a big genius, a great Talmid Chacham, who was actually a Rosh Yeshiva in a Chabad Yeshiva in Bnei Brak until he was 40 years old. When they picked him, he was also draying zich in a kollel in Yerushalayim, from where the Mechon harvested its first group of Talmidei Chachamim, and they picked him out of a hat. He had absolutely no scientific background, zero. He had learned Gemara Lamdus. He was saying a shir, blat shir, Lamdus shir every day. He had zero background in technology and whatever. They picked him. It was a good pick. He made it his life's work, and he became the driving force behind this Mechon. He traveled to America several times. He partnered up with many, many professors. There's a famous Professor Zev Lev, I think, who was like his partner in the whole thing. And this Mechon begins to develop. Now, this Mechon actually develops like alongside and in the shadow of Shem Zalman Auerbach. These are a lot of the main contributors to this Mechon. Sai on the science end and Sai on the halacha end are people who lived or Dreizich in Rechavia, where Rav Shem Zalman lived. They were members of Rav Shem Zalman's weekly shir that Rav Shem Zalman gave for laymen. Rav Shem Zalman had a shir he gave once a week for Balabatim. These were members of the shir. So this is like an institute that grows like in the shadow and under the influence of Rav Shem Zalman. He's the guiding light. Rav Yitzchak Halpern himself is a posek of note. He published a sefer Shut Ma'aseh Choshev, which I think is today 7 volumes, and several other whole svarim. One is on Maliot b'Shabbat, an elevator sefer. He has a sefer on Grama b'Shabbos, a whole sefer on Grama, and several more. He was a Talmid Chacham of note on his own, but this develops in like Rav Shlomo Zalman's shadow. Rav Shlomo Zalman's Chevraya is the one that's pushing this forward, who's guiding the whole elevator shadow. And what they do is basically that they develop a new software package for an elevator where you can install it in the elevator so that it takes over all the software, all the computer systems, and it cuts off every one of these potential electrical circuits that would be triggered by a person entering an elevator. It shuts them off. It will take away the weight monitor, it will take away the speed monitor, it will take away, and it just sets everything at the highest setting, as if the elevator is at its fullest capacity at all times. Like that, there's no safety concern, and there's no Shabbos concern. And in regards to the door, which is a legal problem, the door, in order to prevent the door from closing on someone, elevators are mandated by law to have an eye, right, that you stick your hand and it stops. So now, in order to get around that, what they did is they instituted a series of beeps, where the elevator will warn you that the door closing is coming. And on a Shabbos elevator that has the hechsher of this mechon, one has to be makbid not to step into the elevator when the beeping is going on, because that means the electronic eye is triggered. When the beeping is going on, the electronic eye is engaged. When the beeping is not going on, the electronic eye is disabled. And a person comes in, etc., etc. Many, many technical innovations that they built in, and they kept updating their package. And in Eretz Yisrael, you'll see a lot of times, not in Bnei Brak, but in Yerushalayim or in hotels or in buildings, etc., you'll see a hechsher. Actually, someone sent me this morning, after we put on the chat, we can talk about this. Nachmi Schiffer sent me a picture of the elevator in the building he's staying in Eretz Yisrael, of the hechsher from the Mechon Mada, whatever. It says what year they, like a regular hechsher, it says the last time it was checked. It says until when the hechsher is good. It's a regular Rava Machsher on the elevator, that this elevator is using this installed software package that makes the elevator kosher. Now, this Mechon got a heter from Rav Shlomo Zalman, and Rav Shlomo Zalman was matir this elevator for them, and in Shmir Shabbos Gil Chassid's brought down Rav Shlomo Zalman's name, and they got a heter for this. Now, Rabbi Yashiv, interestingly, who was another Yerushalayim Aposik who Levi Yitzchak Halpern was very close with, so he was a little bit less clear about his heter. Yashiv definitely liked some of their innovation and felt that it was sufficient enough to be mekel. and he would let Rabbi Yashiv had a bigger problem with going down on an elevator. He felt that going up, they completely made it in a way that it's not violating Shabbos. Going down, Rabbi Yashiv felt like you're contributing to the mechanism that's bringing the elevator down, and therefore, even though the electric engine is doing it, the pistons are doing it, but you're like Shnaim Sha'asu with it. And Rabbi Yashiv had a thing, and Ad Kach is a funny story, when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Halpern put out his Sefer Maliyot B'Shabbat, he went around bringing it to different Gedolim that he was close with, and he brought it to Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv looked at it and he said, it's mamish beautiful. Mailim b'kodesh v'lei meridin. Which means is A, a compliment, like you should keep steiging, keep growing, and B, Mailim b'kodesh, you're allowed to go up with what you put in the Sefer v'lei meridin. You can't come down. This is not convincing enough to me to allow you to come down in an elevator on Shabbos. Now, in 2009, there was some big put. Now, all along, the Bnei Brak Paiskim, let's say Shmuel Vosner, Nissen Karelitz, were strongly against. They held, A, like the Chazon Ish, everything electrical is much more chamer, because it's all derisis. There's much less wiggle room when you're handling derisis. And B, they were very sensitive to the idea of Zilusa the Shabbata and protecting the nature of Shabbos, and there was no wiggle room on elevators, Shabbos elevators in Bnei Brak. Now, in 2009, a cadre of young Talmidei Chachamim hooked up with some scientists, some mechanical engineers, and they did like an expose on this Machon's elevator and said that it's not doing what it claims to do, and there's all sorts of problems, and they went and they collected signatures, and they got Reb Shmuel Vosner, Reb Nissen Karelitz, Reb Chaim Kanievsky signed on, Baron Leib, I think, signed on, and the shocking pickup was they got Rabbi Yashiv to sign on. They got Rabbi Yashiv to sign on that the Machon's elevators are not kosher. Reb Shem Zalman was already long deceased. Reb Shem Zalman died in 1996. He was long gone, and they paskin that the elevators are not doing what it says to do, and you can't use a Shabbos elevator on Shabbos. Now, just to know, in the tshuva, in the Kol Kaira, the tshuva that they put out, it's interesting to see Shmuel Vosner does not hide his predisposed displeasure. Shmuel Vosner writes, he says, Kvar shanim harbe chashashnu b'chlal Yisrael zilzula b'shabata. It leads with that right away. For many years, even when you told us that it was halachically okay, we felt it was zilzul the Shabbos. Achshav shenoida hanal, that maybe it's not even so oiskalt, and in Shabbos, hugam begether iser v'arini mitzaref lanal achasam Shmuel Levi Vosner. So Rav Vosner writes clear that I was predisposed to be against Shabbos elevators due to the zilus of the Shabbat element of it. But now that you tell me that it's not even oiskalt, then I'm happy. Now, Rav Levi Yitzchak Halpern, his Machon, published rebuttals, strongly worded rebuttals, and showed that the science was faulty and that these Rabbanim were misled, and they stand by their hechsher, and they collected some more signatures to agree with them, and Rabbi Yashiv was that you told them things that aren't true, and etc., and the fight rages on. They didn't change their position, and there's still many Shabbos elevators that have their hechsher, obviously. They're the better hechsher for Shabbos elevators, and they did not bow down to that psak from Bnei Brak, which is primarily predicated on Zilus of the Shabbata, because that's the main thrust of these poskim. Now, so they start with it, and to me it was like the Gemara says, Yerushalayim le'neschat l'shvatim, which means something different. But Yerushalayim is not given to one specific method of thought. Yerushalayim is a big cosmopolitan city that has many people, and obviously yes, there are Charedim and Kanoim, but there's also many other stripes and colors of Charedim and less Charedim, and therefore the Shabbos elevator, based on the heter of the Smachon and Rosh Zalman and Rosh Zalman's school of thought, definitely caught on. In Yerushalayim, there's hundreds, probably thousands of buildings that have Shabbos elevators, and there are buildings all over Yerushalayim that are built to relatively high heights that would be very uncomfortable without a Shabbos elevator, and all the buildings that are marketed to Americans buying buildings have Shabbos elevators, etc., etc. It definitely caught on in a very wide-ranging and popular manner in Yerushalayim, as opposed to Bnei Brak, we're up to just to close the circuit over here, up to where we started with this new development that was being built in Bnei Brak. There was no even attempt to have Shabbos elevators in Bnei Brak. Now this was the most recent attempt, and it just ended up circling back to the same themes again. That even if Rabbis Gelber and Rubin felt that, and they were partnering with this Machon, with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Halpern's son, who's today the Reish of the Machon, who, keep in mind, we're talking about someone with a beard down to here, from as could be. No, we're not nothing liberal about it. They were partnering with that Machon to tweak the elevator in light of the critique and make it perfect. And some Seif, it circles back to the same thing. That even if you could make the elevator perfect, the Rabbanei Bnei Brak, the Gedolim of Bnei Brak, felt that in order to protect the unique nature and environment of a Shabbos, they're not comfortable allowing the elevator, even if you can tell them there's no actual current halacha shayla. Now, I didn't realize how long this was going. I really wanted to go into the idea of Zilus of the Shabbat a little more, so I think this is going to become a series. We're going to continue. There's many more shaylas throughout the Deiris, like, for example, trains and bikes, and even driving on Shabbos, that are relevant to the same underpinning, so we'll continue.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.